Rita, welcome to Future Solving.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here, Brian.
You're our absolutely first guest, and I'm so excited to have you. And I can't think of a better person to be starting.
Oh, thank you so much. That's a great compliment.
Of course. And I've learned so much from your work over the years, and you're the foremost thought leader on strategy and innovation, and you've affected and helped leaders around the world in so many different ways. And I would love your take, because in this moment that we're in today, there's been a sort of renewed focus on the topic of strategy in the last decade, or in the last couple of years, than there maybe even was in the decade preceding it. And I'd love your take on this phrase AI strategy, and how everyone needs an AI strategy. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. I can tell you have some, as I assumed you would.
Cast your mind back 120 years. And Brian, tell me about your electricity strategy. That's what I'd really like to know. AI is a technology, right? And, and it's an enabling technology. I think it's a really, really important enabling technology, and it's going to change everything. And if I were to connect back to when electricity first was possible. If you think about the things that were not possible before we had electricity, every factory had to be built linearly because it came from a single power source. So it was a steam engine or a river or a windmill or something. And so all the pieces had to go like in line. They were dirty. You could never turn them off. They ran 24 hours 7. And they were very limited in what they could do. I mean, before that, mass production paradigm, they were enormously generative in terms of their productivity increases, but they were also, with the wisdom of hindsight, we know, extremely limited in what they could do. So once you had electricity, you could now have all the little machines operating independently of each other. They could be turned off at night. You could have them located in different places. You could optimize for different things. But it took us about 40 years to go from that very linear factory array to the more modern systems that we would now think of natural to the mass production paradigm. And I think that's where we are with AI. So AI is going to fundamentally shift the way that we organize, the way that we strategize, just the way electricity did. But that's not the strategy. The strategy is, what is the goal that we're trying to achieve, and how are we going to get there? And AI is in service of that. It's not, I want to have an AI thing that I want to achieve. In fact, I was just talking to a client about this the other day, and they were saying, they want to put AI adoption in the reward systems for their senior executives. And I was like, don't do that, because they'll figure out some way to game the system that yes, they did AI. What you want to do is say, how is AI helping you make more real-time, faster, more successful decisions? How is AI helping you snuff out risk in your system? How is AI helping you do A/B testing faster? Helping you communicate across disciplines. So have the physicists talk to the chemists, talk to the bio people, talk to the artists, talk to the humanities. How is AI helping you do those things? Those are the outcomes you want from AI.
That is beautiful. So well said. Could not agree more. I always say that you might need to update your existing strategy now that AI is available, and we can do things we couldn't do before, right? But so before the interview, you talked about how when you went to study at Wharton, you just missed the cutoff of being able to study under the late Dr. Akoff, who's been a big influence on, sounds like, both of our work. And even more so yours, because you were right there, right at the time that he had just left. And so I would love to hear your take on, you mentioned that it's informed so much of your work over the last, what was that, in the late 80s, early 90s, so the last 30 years. What are some of the things from that time, some of the lessons, or some of that you feel like that have really continued to thread through and been just a big part of your work that you learned?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I should say a couple of words about Russ Akoff first.
Please do.
So he was really one of the emergent figures in the early systems thinking movement. And what these folks were trying to do was say, you can't understand a system by taking it apart and understanding its component pieces. You have to really see how the system operates and how the various components of it interact to produce outcomes that are different than what you would expect in understanding, a piece of it. And so what Russ was trying to do at the Wharton Social Systems Science Institute was introduce that way of thinking to business systems, social systems, how you understood things. And he always used to love talking about management was really management of a mess.
Management of a mess?
A mess, yes.
Yeah, it's true.
And a system is a mess, right? Because it's all these different pieces. And unlike a complicated system, so, like a Boeing 747, it has 4 million parts, and it's very, very complicated. But like we tend to be able to predict where it's going to go once we've built it. That's very different from a system where the parts interact with each other to produce different outcomes at different levels of analysis. So Russ was very big on saying you really need to understand the system and you can't decompose it. The second thing I thought that was very profound in what he would say was sometimes the best system thinkers are architects. Mm-hmm. And the reason he mentioned that is he said architects have to think in wholes. Like you can't put a marble column on a building that's built, out of light materials that's not on that foundation that's soundly built. So architects, by definition, have to think of all the interactions between things. And so he was a big advocate for suggesting that management thinkers think as architects. Mm-hmm. And the way it's sort of gone into my own thinking is a lot of the work I do on innovation and organizations trying to grasp how they should function in increasingly uncertain environments is, really be thinking about what are the interactions that you want to promote and which are the ones you don't want to. Mm. So I'll give you a very tangible example. One of the design decisions that you have to make if you're thinking about what your organization is going to be like is what parts of the organization need to be tightly coupled to each other. So I take an action and it's going to affect you because we're tightly coupled. Right. We're connected. And then how do we, in contrast, design parts of the organization that are loosely coupled? So I take an action, you take an action. We're connected to each other, but loosely. So you know what I'm doing and I know what you're doing, but you don't affect me in that kind of direct sense. Now, loosely coupled organizations have some really strong advantages in uncertain situations. Mm-hmm. Firstly, something that's unexpected that happens in one part doesn't necessarily flow over and affect the rest. Secondly, they can adjust much more frequently and much more quickly. And thirdly, people can take much more independent action if they don't have to go back and check with 25 other people whose action might be affected by theirs. And that was the kind of thinking that Akoff really espoused.
Okay, so that reminds me of a question that I was hoping to ask you today, which was if I know that you recently announced you have a new book coming out next year. I think next September, was it? October. Okay, hey, that's my birthday month, so it'll be a great present. And I was going to ask, is there anything we can know about what you're researching or what the topic might be?
Oh, yeah. So the tentative title, I haven't gotten this approved by the powers that be at Harvard Business Review Press yet, but I'll go out on, for you, I'll go out on a limb.
Thank you.
It's around what I'm calling inventive strategy. So if you think about the kind of arc of my books, the first one was called Entrepreneurial Mindset, and it was about how can we teach large established companies to think like habitual entrepreneurs because they need to be continuously renewing themselves. And then Market Busters was about where do you find opportunities. Discovery-driven growth was about how do you do all that with discipline. The End of Competitive Advantage introduced the connection between strategy and innovation, which was this idea of transient advantage. And then my most recent Seeing Around Corners was sort of, well, how do you know these big changes are happening? So inventive strategy is really, okay, that change is upon us.
Now we know. We've seen around the corner.
We've seen around the corner. The change is here. How do we now create organizations that are permissionless in the sense that decisions can be made as close to the edges of the organization as possible, that are motivated by a purpose, where the units of value creation are very different than the ones that we conventionally thought of. And this is all in the context of this massive transition we're making from the world all of us know, which is the world of petrochemicals, cheap energy, plentiful materials, mass production, a million exactly the same of one widget, to a world we don't know about yet. It's digital, so it's cheap microprocessing and cheap intelligence. You talk about AI, cheap intelligence. It's going to be services instead of products. So here's an interesting thing, right? So in the last revolution, what we did is we took things that used to be services and we turned them into products. So take washing your clothes. In something like 1920, there were 725,000 people employed in the United States as washerwomen. Because that was the way you did it back then. And so then we turned it into a product. We turned it into a washing machine. And now what we're doing is we're taking a lot of products and we're turning them back into services. And the canonical example there would be music. You used to buy 18 songs on a physical CD to get the one that you wanted. And that was awesome for the music companies.
Exactly.
And now you don't even buy music, you rent it. And you don't even buy a CD, it flies through the air. And you're not even listening to albums anymore, right? You're listening to a playlist that's been curated for you by an algorithm. And so it's a complete revolution in how we think about value creation. And that's really what the book's about.
That's fantastic. I can't wait to read it. I'll wait diligently and patiently until next October, but I'll try not to bug you about it. But okay, so then when you mention about permissionless and things being, it sounds like a little more autonomy. across the organization. I'd love your thoughts on how you measure those interactions between those, because I think we have a measurement problem in our organizations, right? Where we're measuring, we get a scorecard where every department's showing green, and yet customers are leaving, or
Absolutely.
And so I'd love your take on how is that part of what you're going to be covering, is
Yes.
the measurement issue that we have?
Yeah. Well, so a couple of things on measurement that I think are going to be really challenging for organizations organized for the mass production paradigm to absorb. The first thing is, I think any company right now that measures and rewards and has KPIs around time-based metrics is going to have to really rethink. Because we're seeing it already. Clients are telling law firms, I'm not paying you to train your junior associates, right? I'll pay you to get the case resolved, but I'm not paying you for time. They're telling accountancies, again, same thing, right? Here's what I want from you, so I'll pay you for the result, not for time. So imagine if we were all, and I don't think it's going to go to this extreme, but imagine if we were all entrepreneurs with our own sets of value creation, and we didn't get measured on some intermediate measure, like how many widgets did you put through an hour. We got measured in things like, what actually was your customer prepared to pay you to get this thing done? Right. And so I think what we're seeing in the organizations that are doing this better is a really direct connection between how well, whatever the level of the organization you're trying to understand works, and the degree to which that reflects the benefit to the person being evaluated. So you're going to get a much closer connection between the actual value in a marketplace of sorts and the benefit that accrues back to the person creating that value.
One thing that even as you describe it to me and throughout this whole conversation that is remarkable about you is your ability to take these extremely complex topics but distill them down to something like Einstein said, right? Like if you truly know a topic, you're able to explain it simply. And I wonder your take on how many, and I'm not asking you to put a specific percentage on it, but I've sometimes wondered the percentage of great ideas, especially coming from academia, and especially when I think about like social systemic type of research that there's a whole world there that to me, that struck me coming as a practitioner where I was at Microsoft and these other places looking for good ideas. And it felt like the things that were readily available for me to pull off the shelf were missing all this great, other ideas and research. And I felt like at the time, my hypothesis was a lot of it had to do with communication. So I'd love your take on, are there some ideas that you wish, like either that you tried to put out there, but you realized it wasn't the right timing or wasn't put out the right way, or just that you've seen others, Dr. Akoff or others throughout history, or even recently where, there's such good ideas, but that the communications ends up being the bottleneck?
Well, Brian, I would go beyond that. And I think it's really a modern tragedy of business academia specifically. So if I'm a doctor, I actually read medical journals because the research that's done in medicine informs what I do for my patients. Like if I learn that there's a new thing that's shown efficacy in heart treatments, now I'm open to letting the pharmaceutical company that did that thing come visit me, and then we have a conversation, and I make a decision about whether that's a tool I should add to my toolkit to help my patients. We have no such construct in management research. So management researchers get rewarded for publishing articles for other management researchers that they cite, right? They don't get rewarded for publishing things that practitioners find valuable. In fact, there was a period, just maybe this is getting a little bit better, but there was a period where if you wrote stuff that managers thought was edible, it was actually seen as a negative. That's so normative was the word that was used. If you wrote normative research, that was considered a big bad word. And so to me, what would be better would be if we had a way of saying, yes, we're doing this research, and then we're going to, part of our remit, part of our commitment to have this incredible job we have where we have time to think, we have time to reflect, we have time to, I could take 3 years to mess around with a problem if I wanted to, right? And that's a luxury managers don't have. So if we took that scarce and fabulous luxury and said, it's our job to instill the best of management practice based on those ideas, because I think I've read something you wrote about that you started looking at the academic literature, and we're absolutely astonished to find that many of these really thorny problems practitioners are facing have been dealt with a long time ago.
Exactly. Like in the 50s.
Yeah. And we know about them. So go back to this idea of tight versus loose coupling. Right? This is a chronic problem in management practice because people aren't taught that this is a decision you need to make, and you shouldn't just let it happen to you, right? And we know that from the academic literature, going all the way back to Akoff, to systems theory, and so I think one of the sort of big areas of opportunity that we have is there is this just ginormous library of knowledge that simply doesn't cross over this bridge we have between theory and practice in business academia. And my theory about why that is that, the business academics, when business schools were first sort of started, a lot of the people that taught in them were practitioners. And then the universities got hammered for that. They said, no, this is you're just hack jobs, right? You're not real professors. And so they said, you got to have people with PhDs teaching these things. Right. And then, so what do you get rewarded for as a PhD? Well, the ultimate goal is you get tenure someplace. And how do you get tenure? You write articles. And how do you evaluate the goodness of an article is, well, how many other academics cited it? And so you have this sort of reinforcing circle where you're not incented to see your work come to life in real companies. And I think it's a shame. Now, I think one of the things that AI and some of the developments that are happening around business schools and some of the genuine crises we are facing in how our business organizations are functioning in the world, perhaps this is an opening where we could shift those incentives, where we could really say, hey, there's got to be a space for somebody whose work has had an impact, a big impact, to really make a difference. I would just add one more thing on that, which is if you look at the academics who have really had an impact on how business is done. So I'm thinking here of the early pioneers in the quality movement. Did they belong to a department? No. Did they get tenure? No. Did they come up through a standard university hierarchy? No. Did they have an enormous impact on the world? I'm thinking of people like Deming and Duran.
Yes. What about Frederick Taylor?
Frederick Taylor, absolutely. And so I think when we really think about it, the people whose ideas have had fundamental impact in how we do things in the world, they tend to be at the interstices. They don't tend to be in the mainstream.
Yeah, that's very true. And it's interesting that you say about it's another measurement problem, right? Because if they were instead of being rewarded based off of citations, they're rewarded based off how many companies have actually implemented these ideas and was it successful or not, which would be a very difficult and qualitative thing to measure. Right. But that would be really fascinating. Right? So one question that I feel like, as the expert in strategy that you are, that I feel would be wrong not to ask you would be, how do you, I'm sure you have a succinct definition for strategy when people are wondering, because it's a word that everybody loves to use. And they talk about strategic this, strategic that, and making strategic decisions. And yeah, so you feel the same way I do of like, I don't know if that's strategy.
Strategic procurement.
Yeah, right. Or that's, hey, that's planning, or that's right. That's not strategy. So how would you define strategy?
So the definition I like is a strategy is a central integrated concept of how we're going to achieve our objectives. And each of those words matters. Central. I take 3 people from your organization and I say to them, tell me please, what is our strategy? And I get something that sounds vaguely coherent back. Right? So that's the first test. Is it central?
Like systemic in a way.
And yeah, does everybody kind of get it? Right? Integrated. What that means is all the bits and bobs about how we do things work together in honor of that strategy. So if I were to say, what's Walmart's strategy? For years, it's been how do we deliver everyday low prices to mass markets of Americans? And so if you go into a Walmart waiting room, I would not expect you to find, Chanel fragrances available on display and Louis Vuitton, sofas. And no, you're going to find, suppliers' samples that were left over from the last time they came trucking out to, Arkansas. It's going to, and the reverse is true if I go into a Chanel waiting room. Right. So, but it has to flow through the whole organization. So if you're at Walmart, right, every single leader in that place is expected to know to like a tenth of a penny what their costs are, what their profits are, what their operational structures are. And that's just the culture. That's the way we do things around here. So integrated, it all kind of works together. And I'm sure you've seen a lot of companies, and this is particularly the case when you have a lot of merged companies with a lot of leftovers from what came before. And it's just a mess. It's not, it doesn't all work together. So central integrated concept. And this is where strategy gets hard because it's not a thing you can drop on your foot. It's an idea. And that idea, to be powerful, has to be communicated through storytelling, through examples, through repeated questioning and pushing. And did you really think that through? And, so it's a concept. And concepts have to be communicated human brain to human brain. And then we get to the how. And this is another place where otherwise sound people just run right off the rails when it comes to strategy. And kind of back to the question we were talking about, what's our AI strategy? Well,
exactly.
How? If our strategy is, let me just make this up, if our strategy is to use AI to be the most rapid responder in making student loans to any student who comes to ask for us, right? How are you going to do that, right? So how is AI going to help you to achieve that? So good strategies are the how. Less good strategies kind of embed the outcome in the how. So our strategy is to be the number 2 or 3 share provider in the thing. Well, how? Is it offering everyday low prices? Is it geographic domination? Is it you're going to buy off every congressman in Europe? How are you going to do that? And then what are our objectives? What is the common goal that we all are driven by that creates alignment, that creates coherence, that we can kind of use as our North Star. And that allows us to achieve this coherence in what we're all here to do. So a great example of this would be at Novartis. They recently made a series of big strategic decisions. And Novartis, like many pharma companies, had a big consumer arm. They had a big eye care arm. And their CEO said, no, our strategy is going to be, we're going to really double down on innovative medicines. That's going to be our thing. These other things are kind of a distraction. And so we're going to separate them and we're going to really focus in on that. And it's how to do that in service of our patients. And what we do is really hard, but when we get it right, it makes a real difference in the world. But he also has this fascinating cultural corollary where what he talks about is wanting his people to be inspired, curious, and unbossed, which I just love.
Unbossed.
Yeah. And Novartis, very interestingly for a pharma company, has used that kind of cultural transformation to do some really very cheeky things almost that are different, a departure. So I'm thinking of their Super Bowl ad. So they had this Super Bowl ad, and the ad, pretty risque. They focus on women's breasts. So they have cheerleaders, they have dancers, and it's all to this tune. I see you looking, I see you looking, I see you looking, and all these women are you're looking. I was looking at this ad and I was going, what is that? And then all the music stops. It opens up smartly and it says 1 in 6 women watching this show today will be detected with breast cancer.
Wow.
And then so much attention, so little perspective, something like that. Go get yourself screened. So a lighthearted and very accessible way of introducing a very serious subject. But, you cannot imagine a traditional pharma company ever venturing to do something like that.
Yes, no. That is, I didn't catch that ad, but that is...
Go look it up.
That's certainly, that's certainly a disruptive way to advertise that. And what you mentioned, though, with Novartis and in general with strategy, really ties into something that I think a lot about, and I'd love your thoughts on. I feel like there's a dearth of vision in the world and in business, the business's context, political context, and not to get into politics at all, but just that I feel like maybe, I don't know if there always has been. Obviously we can point to different luminaries and visionaries throughout history that had a bold vision for something they wanted to achieve, that then they galvanized everyone against and went and did, which you're talking about, the objective shouldn't be the same as the strategy. The vision should be separate. I'd love your thoughts on, one, if you are seeing the same thing, and then 2, what do you advise for leaders? Because from what I've been seeing, it's not something people are taught in school or on the job. You get to leadership by being a good operator, and then all of a sudden it's like, how do I become a visionary?
Right.
I'd love your take on what people should do that want to kind of develop that skill.
Well, the first thing I think you need to realize is you don't get out of bed one morning and all of a sudden you're Gandhi, and you have a vision for post-colonial India. I mean, it doesn't work like that. I think the process of articulating the vision really comes down to maybe 3 things. So the first thing is using your imagination. And I think a lot of times people think of strategy as a very analytical exercise. It's all about the spreadsheets and the 5-year plan and the flip charts.
Break things down to understand them instead of looking at the part as part of the bigger whole.
The first thing is you need to create the space to let your imagination go, right? Then the second thing is, I think you need to entertain multiple possibilities of what that could be like. And then the third thing is, I think you need to think about, how would you know if you had succeeded, right? How would you know if you had accomplished this really great sort of vision? And I think, a practical example of a company that did this was Microsoft. And when Satya Nadella came in, Microsoft was kind of clinging to its glorious past. We were all about PCs. They had this lumbering phone business, which was never going to get back in the game. And what Nadella did was he said, I want to break away from that. I want to focus our company on increasing, and I forget the exact words, but it was something like increasing productivity for people all over the world, leaving behind, put a computer on every desk in every home, and leaving behind that vision. And with that vision, what he allowed the company to do was focus on leading indicators, focus on customer engagement, focus on customer usage. And it was all cloud, it was all mobile, it was all, kind of the future. And he really turned the company into a very different kind of organization in terms of what it was looking for. So when you think of of leaders who have articulated these very inspiring visions, they tend to be rooted in something that's also very practical. So, if my company wants me to improve productivity for everybody in any way I can, that's something I can actually work on today in my own way, right? So if I can help somebody proofread a document 10 times faster than they did before, that's accomplishing that vision. So I think there's also this connectivity, because a lot of vision statements are just out there, right? So one of my favorite statements about vision ever was when Lou Gerstner first took over at IBM. Now, cast your minds back in history. He didn't come from the computer industry. He came from a cereal business. He'd been a consultant. The people at IBM were like, who are you? And IBM was on its knees. I mean, it was in deep, deep, dark trouble. And the conventional wisdom at the time was, this company needs to be broken up and sold for parts. And that's what they brought Gerstner in to do, basically. And I'll never forget, he was maybe 2 months into the job, and some reporter said, Mr. Gerstner, what is your vision for the future of IBM? And he turned around and he said, the last thing this company needs right now is a vision. And what he meant by that was, he had not yet had the time to deeply think about and understand what IBM's capabilities were. What did they have? What value were they creating? And as it turns out, the value that he discovered was completely antithetical to conventional wisdom at the time, because what he said was, IBM is the only organization that has the breadth, the capability, the depth to let you keep your technological mess as it is, and we will make sense of it for you, and we will give you the results that you want, because we have the breadth of technical knowledge, we have the depth of scientific expertise, and we should not be broken up. In fact, if anything, we should be more tightly integrated than ever. And you may remember back in the day, the advertising line they used to kind of bring this to life was, middleware is everywhere, you just can't see it. And that was sort of the vision, which was, we're going to make your tech stack work however you need us to. And at the time, it was really, really revolutionary.
And even some of that's true for them today, right? And what you mentioned about Microsoft, I can say I started consulting with Microsoft through Accenture in 2014, just before Satya was named. And I then joined them as an FTE in 2019. So I saw that transformation firsthand behind the scenes. And I couldn't agree more that vision of empowering, through going through orientation twice now, I can't forget the mission statement of, powering every person and organization on the planet to achieve more, right?
Right.
So, yeah.
Very well done, well done.
Thank you. My former bosses at Microsoft be very happy, that I remember. But it's so true that the difference the focus on culture in order to achieve that vision, right? But it was also much more clear once you have that articulated vision that every single person can see themselves in, right? It makes such a big difference. So now we're going to play our game.
Our game.
And
I love
yes,
games. I love
and
games.
so we have this amazing hat that Guildhall found for us, and there's a couple scenarios in there. And if we can get to both, great. But if not, we'll just get to whichever one. And the rules are that you pick it out, you read it, and then you talk through how you would apply your frameworks and methodologies to address this scenario.
Okay. A time traveler comes back from the future to tell you that you have to help XYZ AI company win, because when the other company won, they destroyed society.
So if one of them is winning, the time traveler comes back, they say, this other company won in the future and it destroyed society. So you need to help. We're not going to name names because that's not the point of the exercise, but you need to figure out how to help this other company. And I don't mean around the commercial arrangement of like you engaging them. Let's assume that they're readily willing to accept your help and pay you fairly for it.
Sure.
But how would you apply the various methodologies and frameworks of your expertise on innovation and strategy to help them?
Yeah. So the first thing I would encourage them to do is really think about the arena that you're competing in. So I think one of the shackles that traditional strategy has left us with is this notion that the industry is the most important thing. And so in the case of AI companies, it's other AI companies, blah, blah, blah. Right. I think what I would want the winner to do is be really, bloody-minded focused on what is my arena? So who am I helping with my technologies? What is the ecosystem I'm building? And then what I would try to encourage them to build around them is network effects. So I would want them to be very generous with their partners so that they're building a self-reinforcing ecosystem in which they're making it really easy for other people to win based on their technologies, even if it means taking less profit for themselves in the interim. What I would probably encourage them to do if they really wanted to win is they're going to give up a lot of profitability in order for their ecosystem to triumph. And what we're seeing today is ecosystem to ecosystem profitability. So to use a historical analogy, one of the challenges for the whole PC industry when the cloud came in, when the internet came in and so forth, was for so many years, the whole industry had been shackled to this duopoly between Microsoft and Intel. And for the very first time, that was getting broken up. And the winners were the ones that created alternative ecosystems where customers could get their jobs done. So I think the first thing I think about is, how do I build network effects around a really healthy ecosystem that possibly is orchestrated by me, possibly not, but in which each partner does better doing business with me than with the bad guys.
The bad guys. I love that. Okay, I think you answered that so efficiently. I think we have time for the second scenario.
These are fun.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
Playing with fire here. Huh?
That's right.
My Tilly moment.
Yes, good.
You've been named CEO of a Hollywood studio. Hello, Hollywood. All right. So let me before I answer the question, let me put this in context. So Hollywood has for probably about 25 years been in complete and total denial that eventually AI is going to get good enough that many of the taken for granted things that constitutes making a movie are going to be automated in some way. And the early warnings of this have been, we had Toy Story in 1995. I mean, we had the first fully animated movie with no
fantastic
actors.
movie.
Fantastic movie, really well done. But there were no living actors in it. We had the first 2013. We had the first movie that actually laid out the AI scenario we're living through right now in Hollywood. I think it was called The Congress. And asking all the questions people are asking now about who owns your likeness, who owns your identity, who can control what parts you take, who can control what you're doing in those parts, and we've also had in parallel with Hollywood, and this is back to the idea of arenas. We've now got AI influencers. And AI influencers who have been signed to like chief creative artists. They're all out there. And so from an AI influencer to an AI actor is not a huge leap, right? Okay. So the Tilly moment is there's now this AI actress. Her name is Tilly Norwood, and she's sort of girl next door, and she's really cute, and she has an Instagram account, and she says, "Oh, I know I'm just a robot." So she's not making it up that she's not a robot. She says, "Oh, I know I'm not a robot. I'm just an AI, and I'm not supposed to have emotions. But right now I'm feeling really excited." And it's like astonishing. So here's what I would do if I were the head of a Hollywood studio is I would create a separate unit whose job it would be to explore what storytelling looks like when we're integrating AI into what we do as a studio. So how do we use AI rather than fighting it? Because it's going to happen. Right. So let me spend a minute just on disruption. And my old colleague Clayton Christensen talked a lot about disruption. And I don't think people understand day to day what disruption really is. So disruption happens when something that used to be really hard to do and really complicated becomes easy. And when something that was really, really expensive becomes cheap. So if I go all the way back to history and I say, what was the effect of the very first cameras, the first Kodak cameras, right? Well, think about it. If you're a portrait artist, This is an existential threat, because to produce a beautiful image of an actual real human being, you used to have to train for years. You used portrait photography. You had to get your your commissions. You had to have a following. And now all of a sudden, any dude on the street with a Kodak camera can create a perfect image of what there is. So it's a really existential threat. So what do you do? And I think that's an interesting example, right? And throughout history, we've seen these disruptions. So it makes the complicated simple, and it makes the expensive cheap. So what we've got now with AI is a lot of this stuff that Hollywood studios used to thrive on, because it was really hard. I mean, it's really hard to edit a movie today. It's really hard to make the sound on a movie work. There's like 60 individual steps that have to happen to get the sound ready for a movie. We know right now with confidence that's all going away. All right. So if I'm the CEO of a Hollywood studio, I would be pushing my people to say, what is that next generation of storytelling where we're going to combine the ability to create more richness and more goodness for the same budget with the human qualities that we want, which are connection and demand and belonging and feeling positive emotions and storytelling at its finest. So how do we meld those two? Because the genie is not going back in the bottle. And we can sit around feeling all mournful about all the hours we used to sit on the set while, the light guy adjusted. That's all going away. And so once we acknowledge it's all going away, how do we now invent the next frontier of what entertainment's going to look like? And I would be exploring things like, we're making the assumption right now that talent is scarce, that making movies is hard, that people will want to have a fixed story with a fixed ending.
Right.
Is that true?
Right. You can make it interactive.
You could make it interactive. Your ending could be different from my ending. I could watch the same movie and say, hey, this time out, I want the guy to get killed. Next time out, I want the guy to get rescued.
Yeah, or give me another 30 minutes. I really need to know what's going to happen with this character,
or
right?
whatever. So I think being immersed in story and possibly collaborating on stories. I mean, I think there's a whole lot of demand. Oh, one other thing I should say about disruption. The incumbents always feel that it's a threat. They always feel it's a threat. What consumption does is enables much more consumption of whatever it is you're creating. So right now we've got what's called 160,000 people in the Hollywood Union. You could have millions of people involved in the entertainment business if we all got in there. And to take an actual practical example that's in place today is YouTube. Does YouTube have polish? Does YouTube have carefully edited sound where 60 steps are? No, YouTube has cat videos. And yet 21% of all video consuming right now on the planet takes place on YouTube. And it's all user-generated, not all, but much of it's user-generated content. So I think this whole paradigm is going to change. Now, a couple of things for our listeners and observers to take some comfort in. It will take time. And
40 years, right?
Well,
we go back to the beginning of our conversation,
right?
From electricity, it was 40 years before.
Well, so imagine the beginning of the movies. I mean, where movies got started was these like peculiarity booths in circuses and at like country fairs, and people would line up, and there'd be these photographed cards that they'd roll, they'd flip, and it gave you the effect of having a moving picture, and you'd pay your 5 cents or whatever it was to go see a moving picture. And then finally we had like movies as we know them, and everybody was like, oh my God, but nobody knew what a movie was. So what did they do? They set up their cameras and they filmed staged plays. Right? And so the first movies, the use case was, we're going to allow people who couldn't be present at the performance of Richard III to watch Richard III on the movies. It took
with cards for the words, because we don't have sound yet, right?
Exactly, right. Subtitles, right. So I think that's where we are with AI. We're filming the stage play with AI. And so I think the encouraging thing I would, and by the way, as a Hollywood CEO, I'd be paying enormous attention to morale. I'd be paying enormous attention to vision. Like, here's the vision for the future. We're at chapter 1 of what the new movie is going to be. Mm-hmm. And don't give me nostalgia for the old movies. It was wonderful. Let's respect that. It's great.
Yes, honor the history.
Honor the history, but we're going to have to move on. And so imagine we're at chapter 1 of the very first book that's going to be written about the movie of the future. And that's what I'd want to get my people focused on.
That is a fantastic answer. And I'm so grateful to you, Rita, for coming on Future Solving, and hope to have you again sometime in the future.
Indeed.
Thank you so much for joining.
A pleasure to be here.